All right, man. This is the kind of a generalist fleet idea, more of a video for myself than anything else. Kind of keep my thoughts on pen and paper right now. The main thing with this is that it's going to be an upgrade path for ships starting out from the game up until like mid game, I would say. I don't really want to go anywhere like super in game into like Idris's and the giant capital ships, but for a generalist just playing the game and you don't have a specialized role, I think this is probably where it's at for me at the moment. The main thing with this is like if you do have an interest in more of the industrial side of things, mining, salvaging, transportation, all of that, this might not be the fleet for you necessarily, but there isn't really fleet options for those besides mining at the moment. I mean, you have cargo, um, but mining's really the only thing that has like a giant capital ship for it, like the Orion. So in general, I just think, if you're putting your feet into the game, you probably don't want to be sectioned off into one way to play the game or another. You want to kind of flex your you know, wings, go out there and see what's in the game, what you want to do, all of that, and make decisions. So the first thing I would probably start off with is the cutter. I just like the cutter. It also has, you know, some versatility. Has VTOL thrusters. Um, has this stealth variant as well. So it says it can support a fleet for stealth operations. So that's kind of interesting. So you got these two different variants that you could get. Has an internal like living area. It reminds me of like a van. So if you wanted to go camping or something on the weekend, you just go and get in your van, you load up, and you head out. That's what I kind of like about it. The scanning abilities and stuff can also be kind of interesting, but it has the internal cargo capacity to like hold a couple of boxes, living quarters and stuff on the inside. Some small guns, pretty solid design and look, I would say. I really like this little minivan of the universe. The next ship I'd probably go up to is the Nomad. Again, this is also a starting ship, but it's a little bit different. It costs a bit more on the RSI website, so whereas the Cutter's like $40, $45 for starting package, which I think is fine, the Nomad is like $100, or something along those lines. It's you know, is the Nomad better than the Cutter? Probably more flexible. Um, but twice as much the cost. I don't think it's that amazing potentially. I don't think it's going to be super difficult to work your way up to one of these in game as well from the cutter. So we have to look out for that. If you're going to branch into any other like professions, I mean, there's kind of mid-class ships that you can get, like the Vulcan, the uh, Vulture, the Prospector. Like those are the other ships that you'd be looking at if you decide that you wanted to specialize into another section of the game, mining or salvage or whatever else that you want. But the Nomad has this external bay that you can get. Essentially, it holds cargo. You can hold a ground vehicle to give you a little bit more flexibility than you want to do. Also has like a small internal bay, so potentially, I mean, you could go do some bounties and stuff. You could do some box missions. You could go and, gather some boxes off of some lost craft. There's a lot of things you could potentially do with this ship. So you're getting more into the flexibility of things here instead of being stuck in one path. The next thing I would probably do with either of these ships that we're about to talk about is get a rock. So you can start with the Nomad and get a rock, or you can go up to the next ship level and then start getting rocks and things at that point. But the rock can go in the back of the Nomad. It's going to allow you to start mining, store everything on the rock. Just load it back up into the Nomad, fly off, get you some more stuff. Rock's like $50 or something on the RSI store, but you can probably buy this in game fairly cheap, I would assume. It's an entry level mining vehicle. Also, with any of these, if you happen to run into a group of players that have ships, having access to these items for yourself just means that you're going to be able to join them and load up in their ships and help them out without needing to really purchase those bigger ships yourself at the start of the game. So you have the potential of loading up, piloting things with other crews, etc. So the rock can fit in the back of the Nomad. So for singular solo use, just general mining, exploration, little bounties, things that you can do, box missions, you should be able to do all three of those at the same time for the most part inside the Nomad. Next ship I'd probably go for is the Cutlass Black. So this is essentially like an upgraded starter ship as well. It's a little over $100 on the RSS store, I believe. Very versatile, has some decent guns, turrets, a couple of beds in here as well. This is also, it's kind of a gunship slash freight ship slash drop ship slash vehicle transport. So there's a lot of flexibility here as well. I think it's going to be a pretty good option starting out. I mean, it's probably not going to be the most durable ship in the world, but in general, I think it's a very flexible ship that we can potentially use later on. I would even say that this is basically a cheap version of a lot of the other drop ships in the game because it has 6 seats in the back of it, plus a tractor beam to get cargo on. So you can easily pair this up. Like the other thing to look at here is that these ships can work together. So even at this stage, if you got to the Cutlass stage, and you had a group of friends with you, you would have your scout, your nomad, and your cutlass, which is potentially, 3 rock vehicles and 3 ships. And you could have, 3 or 4 players piloting each ship, and you'd be good to go. So not only are you upgrading your packages yourself to get better ships as you move along, you're also having a ships that work in tandem with each other to potentially help each other out. The other ship that I would potentially look into if you're getting to this stage, if you don't necessarily want a drop ship and you want a little bit more long-term flexibility, you can get this Vulcan. This is probably something I would slide in here. We don't know how big the Vulcan's internal storage bays and stuff are going to be, but this is going to give you internal storage. You could potentially use this instead of the Nomad depending on what they do with the internal storage. Right now, I think it's like 16 on the internal storage. Let's see here. Cargo capacity of 24. The Vulcan, I think, is like 16. Yeah, 12. So, as it stands right now, the Vulcan isn't going to be able to hold a rock, but it does have a lot of a lot of flexibility. So you're going to be able to do repair, rearm, refuels to multiple different ships, starting ships, etc. I would throw this somewhere in this bottom line with the Nomad and the Cutlass. Not really because the ship itself is going to allow you to do everything, but it does open up a multitude of support roles that you could do for larger organizations or even your own ship fleet if you wanted. So instead of having someone fly a cutter around, you could potentially stick them in a Vulcan. This thing's like $200 or something on the store. If it does get a bigger hangar at some point to where it can store a rock, I would drop probably the Nomad or the Cutlass in this lineup and then put in the Vulcan. Um, I think the Vulcan would replace the Nomad, but the Nomad's a lot smaller ship for the most part, less specialized. At this point, you probably don't need to focus on this, but it is an additional option that you could stick in as you progress in your fleet. I think it's going to be a really nice ship in the overall grand scheme of things. Got a couple of guns, good armor, good VTOL thrusters, which I'm expecting is going to help a lot of people land when the flight models and stuff come in. Refuel capabilities, repair and rearm capabilities, small cargo bay for box missions. It's probably going to be kind of a very versatile ship, I would assume. So after getting the Cutlass or so, you can get some additional rock miners. There should be room for at least 2 of these in here. I don't remember if the Cutlass can fit a Warthog or anything in there, but you could always get like a Gray Cat Rover or STV, I believe, could fit in here as well. So you could get rock or STVs for ground transportation. But I would probably stick with the rocks on here. With this, if you did destroy any ships in the verse, you would be able to say hand salvage them. So if you have multiple people in these ships, y'all could all come with hand salvage tools and store all that salvage material. If you have the Vulcan and you're able to disable ships, this is where the flexibility of the Vulcan comes in, because if you're able to disable some ships with a cutter and the Nomad and the Cutlass for say, the Vulcan could potentially come in and repair that ship to an operational state, and you could expand your fleet kind of manually that way. So you can slowly just gather supplies and parts off a bunch of smaller craft, and then disable an additional ship, take it over, expand that way without having to spend as much money. Also, since cutlasses and things I'm expecting are going to be fairly common, if we look at some of the NPC ships that you fight now, like starting bounty hunter missions, um, you have like Auroras, a bunch of the starting ships, prospectors. You also have cutlasses, generally, I think freelancers. You have a bunch of like the lower end starting ships. So this is where the flexibility of the Vulcan can kind of replace either the Nomad or the Cutlass at some point, because you have the potential of repairing and rearming a ship that you disable. So you could potentially earn a Cutlass this way instead of buying one in game. That's why it's kind of in this spot here, I think. But you get the Cutlass, you could potentially have this rock. You could have a crew of three separated into three additional ships, or you could have the guy driving the cutter hop into your Cutlass. You'd have your two-man Cutlass crew along with your Nomad single man as three rock miners. So you'd be able to mine, do bounty hunting missions, do box transportation missions. Um, potentially maybe like escorts, like short range, low risk escorts, potentially. Um, a lot of flexibility with all this package, and also a decent amount of missiles between the two ships for the most part. The next ship I'd probably work towards is going to be the Constellations. Constellation Andromeda is the one that I'm going for. This was originally one of the first ships that I actually got. I originally backed with a Cutlass, and then I went into the Constellation Andromedas. These are very, very nice ships. When you're on them, they're very simple, sleek. The only reason I ever upgraded from this Constellation Andromeda is because they just made bigger ship options that were kind of better versions of this when it came out. So I miss this ship, and I just bought back my old pledge, honestly, to get this ship back again. I even preferred it over like things like the Redeemer. But if you did decide that you want to go into like bounty hunting more or something at this point, or if you're able to repair a bunch of ships with the Vulcan in the future, and you're not so worried about upgrading to a massive, like a bigger ship for multi-crew, you could potentially get a Redeemer and then tag team the Redeemer with the Vulcan to disable ships and then repair them and try to expand your fleet that way. But the Constellation, I think, is the next big upgrade that you should go for. Has a bunch of really solid guns on side of the ship. It has also probably, I don't even know if it's the largest, but one of the largest missile capacities I've ever seen in a lot of ships, especially the Andromeda. So the other ones have extra cargo capacities and stuff like that. The Andromeda, I just think, is a very good ship, also for long range engagements. So, smaller ship, able to land, good cargo capacity, you can haul ground vehicles. You could put your rocket DSs in here. So, if you have a couple of those, you might be able to fit all three. You might be able to fit more than three. I don't really recall what the sizes and stuff are, but you're going to have like 50 something missiles inside of this one ship, along with size 5 points and two additional turrets. Um, fairly easy to land, pretty durable. It's probably going to have better armor than a lot of ships that you fight with. Good range. Also doesn't require a large crew, so you can fly this as like a single solo person or with the additional supports. In the future, when they add NPCs, I also think this ship will do well with that. I think the crew size is supposed to be four here, so you could have like one main pilot, two gunners, and then like one person in the snub fighter, I guess. But yeah, it's a good ship, well rounded. You're going to be able to do your bounty hunting missions, your box cargo missions. You're going to be able to load up pretty much any cargo that you want inside of this ship to deliver it if you disable a ship and find cargo on the inside. The other thing that I don't think anyone's talking about with this ship is that it could be a military transport in a sense where it could potentially later on as your fleet expands or you get into bigger ships, this ship could still haul like replacement ground vehicles to your ships. The big one though is that it's massive missile capacity. I think that this ship could be basically a missile refueling ship. So you could load it full of arms, weapons, and stuff in the lower tier. Fly this ship to your longer range military group and then unload missiles from this ship onto all of your other crafts. So you'll see when we get towards the end here that we're going to have the ability to have multiple ships in need of missiles, especially these lower size missiles that are from this constellation. So if there is any way to unload these missiles from this ship and put them onto other ships in the future, I really think that this ship is going to shine kind of in that role. No one really talks about it. So not only is it just like a freight carrier, it's potentially a refueling, like a rearming ship that could rearm a bunch of missiles and stuff for a lot of fighters. Like a lot of fighters have like 4 to 8 missiles, and you're bringing 50 of them on this thing. Maybe you keep 10, 20 of them on board. Even if you like take 30 of them off, you can fill up a couple of racks of ships. So I would naturally tag team this with the Vulcan at some point in a larger fleet. So at this point, you could have the Vulcan and this ship separate from your main fleet and kind of do their own thing. The Vulcan would help do repairs and stuff to the Constellation and refuel and rearm the snub fighter. And the Constellation would be able to give a little bit more protection to the uh, Vulcan along those lines. So I think this could be very flexible just in general, and then you can easily team this up with more and more of these ships that you have. So you can easily bring the Cutlass, the Vulcan, the Nomad, and this Constellation all together in one flight group and do kind of the same, like similar type things if you wanted to. So in this sense, you could have, let's say, theoretically, one pilot and a Nomad with a rock miner. Then you could have your Vulcan with extra missiles, armaments, and repair capabilities for your vehicles and other things. Maybe extra supplies and components for your vehicles to repair after engagements and things. And then you have the Cutlass with potentially two more rock miners. And then you could have your Constellation with an additional, two, three, four rock miners. And overall, I mean, you're looking at a crew of probably, you know, 6 to 8 people over 3 ships here if you're really wanting to do it. The other thing with this is that this fleet upgrade path is kind of scalable. So if you were to upgrade this way, you could easily, instead of buying like a Cutlass or buying a Vulcan, you could buy a second Nomad and then just have people flying Nomads around. You could fly additional cutters. You could go and get additional Cutlasses and fly multiple Cutlasses around. You could fly multiple Vulcans and probably have multiple things to do. When you get to the constellations, I think these are also in the same boat where if you fly multiple constellations, you're not really going to be negatively impacted at all. Like 4 constellations versus, one bigger ship that has all your people on board, I don't think you're going to complain because if you look at even 4 players, each flying their own singular Cutlass, you're 4xing the cargo capacity. You have 200 and something missiles. You're going to have 4 snub fighters. So these ships in particular have a lot of value, I think, especially even as you go up in numbers with them, because even with a two-man crew on this, if you have a big enough group flying these ships, you're looking at a long-range missile boat times whatever many that you have, plus that many snubcraft. So as much as people talk about wanting like a light carrier or like the Kraken along those parts, like if you look at how many people it's going to take to crew a Kraken, you're going to have 20 people, 30 people on a Kraken. You're going to be able to launch like 10 ships or something off of that thing, like fighters. But you have 20 or 30 constellations. They're all going to be able to do their own thing, load up their own cargo. They're going to be able to launch 20 or 30 snubcraft, and they're going to have, a couple thousand missiles that they can just fire at maximum distance, plus, really strong hard points. If you get a battle line of these, I would take a battle line of these constellations versus groups of fighters probably most days of the week. Um, they would have to use an obsessive amount of flares and stuff while they're closing the distance. But also the fact that this can provide, operational support and stuff to a bigger fleet as well as just being self-sufficient on its own. I think it's a very good ship that you could use for a group of friends. Even if you have bigger ships, I would keep this in the back hangar because, again, you can fly it solo and you can fly it with a team. So if your crew just doesn't happen to log on for the day, you can just hop into this and go about your way. It's pretty good. With this, I'd probably start moving toward the Rock DS miners. This would be kind of an upgrade from the Rock miners. They have like 4x the carry capacity. You can operate these solo or with two-man crews. They are rather large though, so they take up a good amount of space. But with this, you're still going to be able to do your mining, your bounty hunting, your, repair, your rearm, refuel, your trading, your freight, all that stuff, and also potentially, unloading cargo from stranded vessels that you find out in space, however that happens. Now, the Rock, I also think that this could potentially see like a rework or something in the future. I think these things were like $70 or something. Yeah, $75 for one of these. I think I still have one just because I wanted the no, I got rid of it. I kept the paint though. Yeah, I got a couple of paints in here. But I would probably work towards getting one of those. The main benefits I could see with the Rock DS is one, it has that arm that's kind of maneuverable. So if you had to use it as a weapon, it has more flexibility to use it as a weapon against NPCs or other players that happen to get across to you. The enclosed cab can potentially protect you from the environments, which I think is going to be a way bigger deal in the future when it comes to mining on surfaces and things like that. But with a ground fleet, if you're using a ground fleet, like if you're solo, you'd probably use the Rock DS. If you have a ground fleet of other rocks, then you'd probably start looking more into like an Ursa rover. So you could be looking into these Ursa rovers. This would be more for your exploration, your kind of beginning ground vehicle play, being able to hold a couple of you know, boxes of cargo. It would take up some room in the constellation, but it also means that you could land all of your ships on the ground, unload an Ursa, and you could potentially take, your full crew from the Cutlass and, the Vulcan or the Nomad, load them up into this. It has room for six, I believe. So if you have the Constellation ready to go, and you have the Snub Fighter that you could unload, for emergencies, you could easily take the other people from the other ships, put them into the Ursa, put someone from the Constellation into the Ursa, go and do some ground missions and stuff with this, and then you'd have all those other ships for support if you really need to. Let's say theoretically, if you put six in the Ursa, you're looking at one from the Nomad, potentially two from the Vulcan, potentially uh, two. plus from the Cutlass. So you're looking at 5 or so players, maybe there. That's perfectly fine for an Ursa, most likely. And then from that point, you know, just do what you want to do. And this is also something that has like weapons for anti-personnel on the ground. It's fairly armored, has life support systems. If you're using this with the rock miners, then you can drive this out, park it, use it to protect your rock miners as they're mining, and also use its onboard scanners to help find mineral deposits a lot easier because they automatically show up with the Ursa, so you don't really have to scan and get confused. The other thing is that just it's has its own self-enclosed area. So if you're using the lower tier rock miners that don't have separated cabs from the elements, if there's some sort of emergency, your people can just leave those rocks, get into the Ursa, and kind of seal themselves off from the outside. Potentially use the Ursa to get back to the ship and just leave the rock miners there if you really had to. So I think all that's pretty good. Next upgrade I would go for is potentially the Carrack. There's kind of two things here. So the Carrack or the Liberator, I think, would be the next upgrade. That you could kind of go either way. For smaller crews and operations, I think the Carrack would be fine, but this is going to be more if you're starting to head towards like multi-role exploration, smaller crew size. So say like if you wanted to move your fleet from multiple ships back into one crew, you could do this fairly easily. You could potentially, on the lower end, you could have like a Rock DS and like an Ursa and some ground vehicles and stuff. You could have a flexible ground package if you wanted to. On the high end, you could have upwards of, you know, if you wanted to specialize in mining, you could have like 8 Rock DSs on the ship. So you could easily have your whole crew be able to have their own Rock DS. If you wanted to be more flexible, you can hold cyclones, you can hold cargo, you can hold Argo rescues. You have a lot more gameplay options that you can do with the Carrack, and it has a medical bay and everything else in it. So there's a lot of flexibility with that. So personally, I would probably lean more towards the Carrack. Even with the small crew, and then that also gives you additional benefits of being able to add additional crew to the ship. So you could easily take a Carrack out with you with your other ships, unload these ships, put them in the Carrack, fly off and do a mission, or put all these ships in the hangar bays, load up onto the Carrack. Not even worry about the Rock DSs if you don't want to. You could just put like 2 Ursa rovers in here, and then load up the regular rock mining vehicles into these the cargo bays. If you can get 2 rock vehicles in the same size of like a DS, then you go from 8 to like 16 rocks, and then you could go from 8 crew on the Carrack to like 16 crew on the Carrack, and potentially just use it as a big mining vessel. But you're looking at it has short range snubs, so instead of having to drive the Ursas for them, you could use the PC snubcraft to fly around, do bunkers, do cargo missions and stuff. You have the cargo base, so you could do search and rescues. It has repair bays, probably just for the ship itself, but it's supposed to have drone bays and stuff as well, so it could potentially maybe do some of the things that Vulcans do in the future. We'll have to see. But overall, I just think it's a good craft, flexible, and good guns. And also, all these previous craft together can pretty much offer a good amount of support to a Carrack if you really needed them to. And then the Liberator is going to be more of your base of operations, your main thing. So this is when you get to a crew size of somewhere around probably 12 to 20 players, you would start looking to get to the Liberator. 12 to 20 players, you could separate easily between the Carrack and the Liberator back and forth. So these two ships together would be able to work and operate on their own for the most part. And then you have the PC's craft to fly back and grab things like the Vulcan if you needed it. But these two ships would be able to handle that 20 crew capacity, I think, pretty easily. This thing has drop seats for 16 people, and then you have the 2 pilots. So I think it's going to be pretty much all that you need for that size group. these two ships here, and then even if you upgraded your size a bit more and you say you had about 30 players or something in an organization, you could easily operate these two with 12 to 20 people, and then have these other vehicles and ground vehicles all loaded up with whatever you want. And then the Liberator, so like your Carrack, for example, if you buy a Liberator, you could put your ground vehicles and stuff into the Liberator, land the Liberator on the ground, free up a lot of cargo space on the Carrack, and then at this point, you could go get an Argo Rescue when that variant comes out. So it's a rescue ship with a drop pod with no jump drive. You could potentially store that in the front because it fits. Unload that on the ground next to your Liberator, and they would have their own kind of dedicated medical bay for like mining injuries and stuff like that. And then you could easily fit other things inside this Carrack and cargo on the Carrack, etc., and use the Carrack for cargo missions while the Liberator force is mining. And this is all like 20 to 30 players, which I think is reasonable for an organization. Anything with massive, like bigger ships than this, like very, very big ships, that's where you're probably taking, like, if you're taking like a Carrack, or not Carrack, like a Kraken or anything bigger than these kind of ships here, you're looking at ships that probably need, 30 people, 20 or 30 people on one ship doing specific tasks to keep it running and operational. Potentially, you could have, on the Kraken, you could probably have crafts that you could go and do other operations with. You could use your Cutlass Blacks and stuff on there. But I just don't see the Kraken having as much versatility, especially as like a ground base. Because the Kraken probably can land, but it might be pretty difficult. I don't know if it has any land hangers either, which would be the negative for that. On the Kraken, if you ended up trying to upgrade to that, like if you go from the Carrack and the Liberators up to a Kraken, you would probably have to load it with like cutlasses and then put your rock miners on the cutlasses. And then maybe you could do similar functions as the rest of this. But if you're taking a Kraken with a bunch of cutlasses versus the Liberator and the Carrack and its supporting craft, at the bare minimum, you'd have the Liberator and the Carrack. And then the Liberator can have the Cutlass on top of it, as well as a bunch of arrows. And then I would probably have. Yeah. The Liberator, you can hold at least, I think 6 arrows per pad. So if you really wanted to, you could load it down with fighters, and you could fully crew them with your 20 players for sure. I don't know if a group of arrows would beat um, everything else, though. But in general, I think that's a pretty interesting way to start upgrading your ships. So from there, if you really wanted to go for a Kraken, you could. I believe the Kraken is. See, they have the privateer and the light carrier. See, the multi-role light carrier I think is kind of interesting. But I'm pretty sure this ship is like $1,000 or something along those lines. The main difference between the Kraken and having the Carrack and the Liberator combo is that you as a solo player or a small crew can fly the Carrack or the Liberator by yourself if you really wanted to. I highly doubt that the Kraken's going to be able to do that. See how many crew persons. Max crew 10. So I'm going to assume that the Kraken can probably hold and operate with 20 to 30 on it. I generally try to double any amount of crew that it says is available on there. So if you look at 20 to 30 and you have the ability to hold a number of ships, Capital class is not going to be able to use all the same jump points as the Carrack and the Liberator could. You're probably not using the Carrack for transportation of vehicles like you can for the Liberator. I guess you could, but I don't really see it be optimal. Using this for mining operations and things, I mean, you probably have room for 5 or 6 cutlasses. You could potentially put rocks on there, but you're not going to be carrying rock DSs on the Kraken. So you have the ability to mine and do mining operations and dropship operations. You can pretty much still do every role very functionally. You could do mining and salvage and all that stuff with this. It could be a good platform if you had a bunch of people that wanted to have specialized ships for certain roles. So instead of doing hand salvage, if you had like vultures and stuff on here, maybe that would be the best use for this. But ground vehicle wise and stuff, this isn't going to have the support package as like the Liberator would. It doesn't seem like. We'd have to look and see what kind of ground bays it would have. We can try to find a review on it because if it doesn't have the ability to really put ground vehicles down, you're not going to have access to rock DSs.
Ship in Star Citizen that many players spent years asking for, with a series of landing pads for small.
If it has bays for dragonflies, then this might have ground vehicle access. This could be the next upgrade that you would go for after everything.
Ships, as well as all of the facilities to keep them appropriately maintained. That mobile base is obviously highly appealing to many such players. I'm Forrester, and
So you got 4 pads here capable of landing a Buccaneer. They're open pads, so potentially you could land bigger things there, but a Buccaneer is the same kind of size as the Carrack can hold. And then you have landing pads here for 2 cutlasses. You could probably land cutlasses on these pads though. So that's 6 cutlasses potentially, so 12 rock miners maybe. And then depending on what kind of ground vehicles they have would be kind of the question here, and also what kind of armaments they have. I see a couple of gun turrets on the side. It'd be kind of an interesting fight, but I don't think you're flying this ship with just 1 or 2 people like you can the Liberator. So although it has the ability to be a mobile base and have multiple ships on top of it, you're looking at potentially 20 to 30 people maybe that you could stick on here and operate things with. Um, but you wouldn't have the flexibility of just like logging on one day, grabbing the ship as a single solo player, and then being like, hey, I'm gonna deliver cargo and ships or something. Probably, I just don't think it would be efficient to do that. But pirate ship wise, I really like the Kraken. This would probably be the next upgrade. So you'd go from the Cutlass and the Liberator with your supporting crafts, and then try to move up to like a Kraken at some point, and then maybe you just put your supporting crafts on top of the Kraken.
welcome to the Dry Dock, a new series which will delve deeper into the ships of Star Citizen. This video will explore the background behind the Kraken, both in and out of game, and then take a look at some of the attributes and statistics of the ship before considering how that might all translate into gameplay. There are timestamps in the video description, although if you're
Because technically, you could put arrows on this if you wanted to as well. Like you could fill this whole thing up with arrows. I think the downside that's going to happen with landing pads in the future is that I'm The only way I can see like AI crew ever being able to like go out and operate any of these vehicles off these landing pads is if they're very specifically made for that. And if you do anything else, it'll mess up the AI probably.
For a fan of the Kraken, you might prefer to watch this one all the way through. And whilst this channel usually focuses on what's currently in-game, necessarily this video will navigate the
I do like the
treacherous
looks of
space
it.
that is speculation territory. Whilst every effort has been made to approach this video accurately, sometimes information is sparse and much is subject to change as time goes along, so please treat the content with a pinch of salt and not as a definitive promise as to what will happen. All of that said, let's dive into the background of the Kraken. The first hints of the Kraken started to surface at the end of 2017 with a community vote to choose the next. In terms of game lore for the Kraken, surprisingly there isn't a huge amount of information available. The Kraken was offered for sale for $1,650.
Yeah, so you're looking at 14, you're looking at like almost $2,000 for this now. So you got to ask yourself, is the Kraken giving you as much flexibility as like a Carrack and a Liberator would? Because you could easily say, even if you had only a crew of 6, let's say, you could easily put a crew of 6, you work your way up from your small ships up to a Carrack. Then you go for a Carrack, you fly out to a planet, you find a good area that you want to mine or whatever, you leave the Carrack there, get into your PCs, fly the PCs back to where you have your Liberator, load the Liberator up with your ships and whatever, fly your Liberator to where your Carrack is and land it, and then you have a base of operations. So you could probably run both the Carrack and the Liberator, I would assume, uh, with 6 players if you really wanted to. Which to me, I mean, that doesn't sound bad. I mean, because you could put, the PCs on the Liberator, fly the Liberator, go sell cargo, um, back and forth. So you could easily use those ships in tandem with each other without being too restricted on what you could do. And then even if you're running them with 6 players, uh, let's see, if you grab the Liberator, Liberator has, I believe it's 3 seats. So even if you brought 3 players and the PCs, you could still fit those in the Liberator easily because the Liberator's crew size is 2 minimum. So you could easily have the Liberator plus a fighter and bring whatever you wanted across. It would just be kind of vulnerable. But you could still have like your 3 people in the Carrack if you wanted to fly across there. I don't know. It's debatable. I mean, you could have multiple trips with the PCs potentially. You just bring your crew half and half, leave one of them on board the Carrack to kind of watch over it. But I just think they're a lot more operational and functional. So like, if you have a crew of 6 on this Kraken, you're not leaving this thing. If I doubt you're defending this or landing it anywhere and stuff with just one person. Also, it's like twice as much money. So if you were to spend cash, you're looking at like $1,000 for a Carrack and a Liberator, $2,000 for this Kraken, which is going to be performing a similar role. It looks like.
Or $1,400 of new money. The privateer variant was slightly more expensive on launch at $2,000 or $1,000. The stated purpose for the Kraken is as a multi-role light carrier, making use of various internal and external landing pads to essentially operate as a mobile base. Accordingly, the Kraken might often augment or
See, it says as internal landing bays. So if it has internal landing bays, they're probably smaller, but that would be a lot more functional with a group of players for sure. But if you don't have enough people to defend this, you can't just use this as like a base of operations and let people just come in and out of it. You're going to need actually an organization of multiple people to take this ship seriously. I would think, 'cause it's going to be fairly easy. Like, if I take a Liberator and put like a Legionnaire on it and fly that Legionnaire over to this Kraken and drop a strike team on it, like, could I take this over? I think there's potential to do it.
Or extend the role of other ships rather than take on their responsibilities directly. So, in that sense, the purpose of the Kraken is to rearm, refuel and repair other ships, as well as load or offload cargo from the extensive cargo bay hidden in the bowels of the ship.
I don't know how much the
The
cargo bay
launch
is.
materials talk about democratizing the use of capital ships, a capability previously reserved largely for the military forces of the UEE Navy, and accordingly seek to. Based on current information, the Kraken would have a total length of 270 metres, a total width or beam of 104 metres, and a total height or depth of 64 metres. For context, that's a similar length to the Idris model currently in-game, but somewhat chunkier. The Kraken total mass is yet to be determined. As a capital ship, the Kraken is expected to house a considerable number
6
of
medium
components.
computers.
The specifications list a large radar as well as 6 medium-sized plant for 2 and 2 capital-sized hydrogen fuel tanks and a capital-sized quantum fuel tank. Both are capital the fuel requirements and 2 retro thrusters, as well as 6 VTOL thrusters for operating variants. We provide the Kraken. The largest armament aboard is a single manned turret armed with 2 size 8 weapons. There isn't really a direct equivalent in concept at the moment, other than to say that perhaps those weapons are the same size as the rear turrets aboard the Javelin, albeit with fewer.
2 size 8 turrets probably hit like trucks. Like, they probably could wreck a constellation or something. 4 manned 2 size 6s. It's pretty good. And then 4 times remote turrets. 2x size 5. That's pretty good. It depends on the layout, though. Like, if we look at these pictures, I can't tell if there's one on the front here, but there's one here. There's going to be vulnerabilities on this ship, for sure. The real benefit here, especially if I was piloting a Kraken, I would put things like the cutlasses and stuff on the surface, and then you could put players inside of those, inside of the turrets, and then you'd have basically a ton of firepower right here on the top of the ship. But even then, you would have, you'd have to space the ships out in a way to where you could shoot past each other. Because there's going to be somewhere on this ship that it just doesn't have very much coverage. But getting smacked with one of those turrets would be very painful.
Of them than the Javelin comes armed with. The Kraken is further armed with 4 more manned turrets, each with 2 size 6 weapons aboard, and 4 remote turrets armed with dual size 5 weapons aboard. All of these weapons seem optimized towards medium to large size targets, presumably leading the Kraken to rely on onboard fighters to defend against, supported by the ample landing options for ships. There are 6 landing pads externally, including 4 fighter-sized and 2 medium-sized for ships like a Freelancer or similar. There's also an internal hangar. And there's a dedicated Dragonfly bay at the rear of the ship.
It says internal hangar, but it
The
doesn't really tell you what
specifications
that
list a
is.
maximum crew of 10, with no minimum specifically stated. Support reasonable to exercise ships each include a wealth of amenities, as you might expect from a mini carrier. The landing pads and their ability to rearm, refuel and repair are obvious starting points, but they're connected to a gargantuan 3,792 SCU cargo bay via an inboard cargo tram system, which could be used to ferry cargo or supplies between that cargo bay and each landing pad. Each pad also has access to a 2-bedroom hab, which may be particularly useful for fighting facility. Captain's quarters are explicitly mentioned. open up a variety of potential use cases depending on the attached air wing. The Kraken could deploy a sizable air wing and then act as a safe space away from the.
That's interesting. Kraken versus. What was I just thinking? Oh, Banu. Hmm. It's kind of interesting. The Banu isn't a flight carrier. I don't remember what the cargo capacity is. Oh, if you land Corsairs on top of that ship, they'd have a ton of turrets on top of that Kraken. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how they do the Kraken. If they don't have, depends, because if they don't have ships or if they don't have like shields or jump seats or anything on board that ship, because it doesn't seem like a ship that you would want to move rapidly with a large crew on board. Yeah, I don't know. I think this would be something that you work up towards if you want after those other ships. It doesn't seem as flexible. Bare minimum, you have a small crew on this thing. You're gonna have to fly it and also protect it and, have, run through the whole ship to get to the top. I think that's probably towards my end game would be a Kraken pirate ship. But yeah, this has just been my overview of the fleet. Make your changes. Think about what you want. If you want to specialize in something, do it. But I think that's very versatile. Once you get the Liberator and the Carrack and all that, then all those other ships can still support and do the same sort of operations functions. So y'all guys have a good one, and I might hop back on the game here in a little bit.